Hi. We continue today in 1 Samuel 9, the story of Saul pursuing his father Kish's donkeys. And as we saw last time, the scene is plainly not just about lost donkeys, and it's obvious because he will encounter Samuel momentarily and he'll be anointed king very soon. So plainly the donkeys are a text function here to get Saul on the journey. But whose function are they? Are they the function of the author of the story? Are they a function of somebody else, perhaps, an editor or somebody later? Last time we looked a little bit at how the relationship between Samuel and his servant boy suggests that Samuel is not prepared to be king because he's following the orders of someone who should be following his orders and didn't really have a clue of what's going on. Today we're going to see how that continues as he encounters these girls at the gate of the city, or just outside the gate of the city, who will tell him where the seer, otherwise known as the man of God, otherwise known as the prophet, otherwise known as Samuel, will be found. But between production of last video and this one, I found a couple of resources I want to share who really opened up this section for me. So you can see on the right side of the screen, I had the scenes of this section from 9:1 to 10:9, and therefore today we're on the second blue section there, 9:11 to 13. But the work of Jonathan Jacobs here, and I'll show you him first. Yeah, here he is at Ramat Gan in Israel. The role of the secondary characters in the story of the anointing of Saul really broke this open for me in a couple of ways. One is he structures this as a chiasm all the way through 10:16, which you can see here laid out, and we're only going to be working with a piece of the B part now because his division of the chiasm isn't how we're going through this for various reasons, mostly time breakdown. So today we'll do 11 to 13, but next time we'll take up a little bit of his structure and we'll go 14 to 21, setting that up. But the point of the chiasm is a couple-fold, and I want to bring that up now as we go back to this, the part of the B scene here, and you can see how it's fitting into this entire section. Last time we looked at the thought that donkeys are suggestive of the Israelites that he's seeking to find. But Jacobs puts more into it than that, as we'll see. So let's look just for a moment at the chiasm, and then we'll see what his point is. So at the beginning and the end is the problem and the solution, the setting out on the journey, taking the servant, seeking the donkeys, and at the end he reports back that he took the donkeys. But in the B part, you can see both the B and the B1 part, we can see the prospect, the succession of the journey. So first there's the journey outward, and then there's the journey back. And as Jacobs nicely points out, there are 3 delays in the outward journey and 3 encounters in the inward journey, and they're closely parallel. They're even more closely parallel in the Hebrew, which I won't bring up here. But in each case, there's one of the recitations of your father will be more worried about you than the donkeys, and we see that on both parts. In the first part, Saul complains that he has no bread to give the man of God, so how can they see him? In the end, the man of God, Samuel, provides bread for him. And then in this first one, they're approaching the city, and they meet the girls that we'll see today going up to the high place, the Bama, translated here as shrine, but high place is important for reasons we'll look at. And the B1 section, again, we hear the father is worried that they have bread, and we already mentioned that, and they meet prophets instead of girls coming down from the high place. And then as we'll proceed through the chiasm and the C and C1 parts in the conversations with Saul and Samuel, the first meeting before the banquet, the second meeting after the banquet, the first one takes place going up to the high place, and the second one takes place coming down from the high place, and both refer to the anointing of Saul by Samuel as prince, or Nagid in Hebrew. And that puts at the center of this entire section the banquet. Only 3 verses there, and when we get there, we'll see some unique aspects of that explain why that's at the center. But part of what Jacob's point here is that the secondary characters express the author's perspective on what Saul needs in order to be king. And so in this first part that we're looking at now, it all appears from Saul's perspective that everything seems coincidental. They run into these girls, and they happen to be near the city, and the seer will help them find the donkeys. But on the second part, as we'll see, Jacobs points out, that's only Saul's limited perspective. The banquet will teach him that this is all being presented as if it's part of God's plan, and that'll be an important aspect of what we look at there. So that from Jonathan Jacobs. Another person we're going to be using here that'll also highlight the importance of this section is Mark Luchter, whose work I really like. Mark Luchter, as you can see here, a scholar, but he's also a wonderful heavy metal guitarist and quite the weightlifter too, so a man of many talents. And here his piece, The Rhetoric of Convention, the Foundational Saul Narratives, 1 Samuel 9 to 11 Reconsiders, takes up the question of the possibility of an original pro-Saul narrative from the time of these events in the story that was then reshaped. We looked briefly at the question in the beginning of this section a few videos ago about why Saul is portrayed this way, and one of the standard views is that if the text is ultimately pro-David, then it's anti-Saul to suggest that David is the true Messiah here, and that Saul was never meant to be the Messiah. But somebody thought that Saul was meant to be, whether that's Yahweh, as the text suggests, or the people of Israel, or at least the pro-Saul people. Luchter raises some very interesting questions that take us back to the beginning of the chapter and the sense of who Saul is. And we'll look at that as we go, but one of his points is that in the section we're looking at here is a competition, not only about monarchy, but between Saul and Samuel, from their author's perspective, on various forms of power. So we'll see one of those is the priestly function. It'll be involving blessing and sacrifice that we'll see immediately here in verse 13. And the question is, is a king the person who provides blessing at a sacrifice? That's normally the role of a priest. Well, Samuel's not a priest any more than Saul is, and so why is he the one doing it? He might have been trained under the priest Eli, whose sons were corrupt, but nobody ever claimed that Samuel was a priest. So is Samuel implicitly claiming to have all the power to be a judge, to be a priest, to be a man of God, to be a prophet? And if not the king, at least the kingmaker in the face of Yahweh, or is it in the name of Yahweh? So those are some of the things that Luchter brings up, and we'll see that as we go throughout this section. So let's go back to the chiasm and begin to look at these couple of verses here more closely. So, as they went up the hill to the town, they met some girls coming out to draw water. And already, I want to note that not only is that signaling the end of the search, but if we go back here, we'll see that the pronouns are singular or plural combined. In other words, is it they or he who goes? And so we'll see a number of times if we go back here, we can see that on the journey further, they travel separately and then together. So let's go back up here to where they started. Noted here, he, referring to Saul, passed through the hill country, but they did not find him. And they passed through the land of Shalim, but they were not there. Then he passed through the land of Benjamin, but they did not find him. So it was a question simply of Saul or of the two of them together. And that'll be one of the questions that we'll also look at is, how important is this servant boy? So now it's back to they. As they went up the hill to the town, they met some girls coming out to draw water. And the Hebrew for girls here, na'aroth, means girls of marriageable age, as you can see the examples from Genesis. And this is the only one of two examples of this in Samuel. Two things this might evoke. Robert Alter, who is one of the people responsible for the idea of a type scene, not unique to him, suggests this is fitting in with the stories that you see in Genesis, where Rebecca meets her, if not her future husband, at least the agent of her future husband, Abraham's servant, in Genesis 24. And then a generation later, Jacob meets he meets his wife Rachel at the well, and then ends up with both Rachel and her sister Leah there. Similarly, in the New Testament, we see the Gospel of John has Jesus meet the Samaritan woman at the well. So is that what's happening here? Well, they're not at the well exactly. It says they met some girls coming out to draw water, which obviously implies a well is there. But that's as far as this goes. There's no question about who these girls are, as there is for both Rebecca and Rachel and the woman at the well in John 4. So I'm not sure I see that, but many scholars do point that out. Another issue here is that this recalls negatively the Benjamite woman who was raped and killed there. The only other previous reference, rather not the only other, but the previous reference to a woman of marriageable age who was raped. And again, Luchter has some nice points on that. I've mentioned earlier the question of, given Judges 19 to 21, why would the text name Saul as a Benjaminite? But Luchter suggests it the other way around, that Saul as a Benjaminite had a proud background, and we'll look more at that a little later, not in this video. But the Judges 19 to 21, the story of the rape of the concubine and the bad behavior of the Benjaminites was written after the fact to take down Saul's claim that being a Benjamite would give him authority. So scholars again disagreeing on the order of which text is commenting on which other. But here the issue is not specifically doing that. It's just about these girls as people who Saul needs to know where the seer is. So he asked them, as you see there, and they answered, yes, he is just ahead of you. And As Bodner notes here down below, while some English translations smooth out the text to make it appear that the maidens speak in unison, there are unpredictable changes in pronouns in the Hebrew text. Bar Ephraim attributes this irregularity to all the maidens chatting at once. So we're not going to look at the details of Hebrew pronouns, but if you can picture the chatter of all these young girls talking at one time rather than they answering in a single voice here, that might get the feel of this. And so they answered, they're just ahead of you. And let's look at the Hebrew of that a little more closely. You can see down below, Yesh hina lefaneka, which is literally, see, he is, behold, in your face. The hine, which you've seen a number of times in Samuel and throughout the Hebrew scripture, a behold word or pay attention word. And so it's as if you could just see him looking behind the girls, although the text doesn't suggest that. But that sense of he's in your face suggests that he ought to recognize him, and he won't, as we see. So again, the sense of urgency with the hurry, literally hurry now because he has come to the city. And so why the girls think he needs to hurry, other than the fact that the people have come for the sacrifice, and so he may be heading up to the Bama, the high place, to offer the sacrifice. So if he wants to meet him before that, he'd better rush. So the girls know all about what's going on, just as the servant boy knew that the seer was in this town. And so it's the second time that Saul is being led by people who ought to be understood as lower status than him by the conventions of the time. But not only do the girls say he has just come to the town, they say the reason, because the people have a sacrifice today at the shrine. And the word for sacrifice, zevach, here, again recalls the earlier story, Elkanah's practice of sacrifice, and you can see in the note below a key word back there, the practice of sacrifice, and one time during the travel of the Ark story where the Beth Shemeshites offer sacrifice, and also the corrupt sons of Eli, as we saw. But here and in the occasions that follow, there is no specific priest, but it's Samuel who must bless the sacrifice, as we see in verse 13 just below on the screen there. And yet we're going to see many controversies over this, because in chapter 15, when Saul offers sacrifice, Samuel upbraids him and says God doesn't want sacrifice. And so we see many times, this is the first of many, that Samuel confronts Saul either way. There's no way Saul is going to be please Samuel based on Samuel's manipulation of him and his power mongering here to claim the power of blessing the sacrifice over Saul, or of conducting sacrifices at all. So we come to verse at the shrine here. I just want to note that Abama here, Babama, at the shrine, otherwise known as the high place, which is widely condemned in Deuteronomistic history as a place of worship outside of Jerusalem. Whether this is before Jerusalem and the authors are simply allowing it to take place before there's a Jerusalem temple without comment, or whether the text is from a previous period, a pro-Saul period, before the Jerusalem temple existed, and the final editor simply left it in here. I'm not going to take a stand on that. But you can see that it's only in these couple of chapters here in 1 Samuel, and we'll see it only once in 2 Samuel, but it'll be condemned a number of times starting in 1 Kings 3:2 for Solomon of all people. So another indication that this might be from a previous period, and it's also one of the key words here, along with one we'll see finding in just a moment. So. And we get to verse 13 here, and as Jacobs also notes, one of the longest verses in Samuel, 44-word speech and respond to a 3-word question, and in the mouth of these girls. Quite a thing for the narrator to put that in the mouth of a minor character like that. So they continue, as soon as you enter the town, you will find him. And this is a key to, the word find is the key word, as Jacob also notes, and I just want to draw attention to that here too. So we saw in 9:4, looking for the donkey, so the repeated finding there, framing, we're not there, as we looked at 2 videos ago. And last time we saw that the boy had this coin to offer as a payment to the seer. I've translated it more correctly to match her as found, whereas the New RSV simply said I have. So I've rendered these here so you can see that found, the Hebrew matz, is a key word throughout this. So as we just saw in verse 11, as you can see in the New RSV, it says they met some girls, but they found some girls, as allows us to hear this in the scene we have here. You will find him, the seer, in 9:20, as we'll see, again reference the donkeys, and also in 10:2. But we'll see in 10:3 down below the three men that Samuel says will find Saul there. Then these signs will find you. And then finally the donkeys are found. So the question of finding is throughout. And of course what Saul will find here, in fact he doesn't find the donkeys, they're found apart from him, but he will find the girls, and he will find the seer, and he will find monarchy as he goes through this. Continuing this verse here. So as soon as you enter the town, you will find him before he goes up to the shrine to eat. For the people will not eat until he comes. And this is a really important translation issue, because when we get to verse 24, which I'll show you now, the New RSV makes it very difficult to make the connection. New RSV has here, so that you might eat with the guests. But the phrase here is, I have called upon the people, echoing what we just saw in verse 13. So here in verse 13 we see, since he must bless the sacrifice, the people will not eat until he comes, since he must bless the sacrifice. After those who eat, those eat who are invited. And that word for invited, the called, is also echoed in 9:24. So what we're seeing here is that Samuel will convene the meal, but the people will not eat until he blesses the sacrifice. In other words, acting precisely like a priest. And that's what will happen at the center of the chiasm in 9:22-24. So now go up, for you will meet him immediately. So the servant girls here rushing around, or having Saul rush around, notice as we go back up to those previous verses, it's a behold, it's a hurry, it's go up and meet him immediately, it's he's here right now. So they introduce urgency to this, that Saul must just get there right now. And it suggests, again, as Jacob is noting, that this all is wonderfully coincidental, isn't it? That Saul gets, and Saul and the servant boy get there just in the nick of time, and they happen to be in the right place, and the servant girls, the watering girls happen to be there to provide him what he needs to know to recognize Samuel. All of it seems like a coincidence, because we're seeing this from Saul's perspective, clueless of what's going on. After the banquet, we'll see that he begins to understand what's happening. But before that, he has to have his first meeting with Samuel, otherwise known as the man of God, or the seer, or the prophet, or the priest, or the judge, or whatever he is. But he's not called Samuel. He's everything else but Samuel. And we'll see that next time. See you then. Bye-bye.